Oh, no. I hope it wasn't a masterpiece.
Well, it's not now.
Remember that time Patrick Swayze made the whole world fall in love with him twice in 3 years? First on a dance floor, then from beyond the grave? That was Ghost, 1990. Patrick Swayze as Sam, the banker who gets murdered and refuses to leave. Demi Moore as Molly, the girlfriend left behind. Whoopi Goldberg as Oda Mae, the fraudulent psychic who accidentally becomes the most important person in the afterlife. A film about love, grief, and unfinished business. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts you didn't know about Ghost. The casting chaos, the accidents that became iconic moments, the dark version of this film that almost got made, and the stories the cast never talked about until years later. Stick around for number one because it involves a film that opened the same weekend its own studio had mentally written it off. And what happened next, nobody in Hollywood has fully explained. Let's begin. Number 15, both the writers and directors' mums appear. Go back and watch Ghost with this in mind. That nun who faints dead away when Whoopi Goldberg's Oda Mae donates $4 million to charity? That's Sandra Rubin, screenwriter Bruce Joel Rubin's mother. The bank officer sitting across the desk when Oda Mae walks in posing as Rita Miller? That's Charlotte Zucker. Director Jerry Zucker's mother, who by all accounts had appeared in so many of her son's films by this point that it was basically standard procedure. Two mothers, hiding in plain sight, in one of the biggest films of 1990. One faints over the check, one processes it. Neither gets a credit most people ever notice. You've probably watched this film a dozen times and looked directly at both of them without knowing. That's number 15. Number 14. The Airplane Guy directed a ghost love story. Bruce Joel Rubin had spent years on this script. It was personal, spiritual, deeply felt. So when he was told that Jerry Zucker, one-third of the comedy team behind Airplane, Top Secret, and The Naked Gun, wanted to direct it, Rubin's reaction was essentially, absolutely not.
Here is a script called Ghost, but it's not a comedy. You know, it has comedy.
Rubin had envisioned Milos Forman, or Stanley Kubrick, serious directors, men with gravitas. The idea of the guy who'd spent a decade perfecting fart jokes and sight gags getting his hands on a tender story about grief and the afterlife was, to Rubin, a category error so large it barely needed explaining. He refused to even meet with Zucker. What changed his mind was a dinner. One dinner with a single rule: no script talk allowed. Rubin sat across from Zucker and discovered, to his considerable surprise, that the man was deeply philosophical, genuinely thoughtful about death, love, what we leave behind.
You leave me, Sam. Hold on. Sam. Oh, Sam.
They talked for hours. By the end of the night, Rubin had agreed. Then Zucker started rewriting. Together they went through 19 drafts. Zucker pushing for more lightness, more comedy, more of the tonal mix that would eventually make the film impossible to categorize. Rubin had written something dark. Zucker wanted something that could also make you laugh. The tension between those two instincts is exactly why Ghost works.
Get off my train!
No.
Get off! Get off! Get off! Get off! Get off! Get out of here!
And it nearly didn't happen because a screenwriter refused to share a meal with someone who once co-directed a movie called Top Secret. Number 13. Half of Hollywood turned the role down. When Ghost went out to Hollywood, the studio's dream casting for Sam Wheat was Harrison Ford. They took him to lunch. Ford was, by all accounts, completely honest. He looked across the table and said something like, "Is this a comedy? Is it a tragedy? It's very weird." Then he passed. He was the first domino. After Ford came Tom Hanks, then Tom Cruise, then Kevin Kline, who was apparently so close to being cast that they were literally about to get on a call with him when one more audition came in. Michael J. Fox passed and later said he regretted it. Bruce Willis passed for reasons we'll get to in a moment. Kevin Bacon, Alec Baldwin, Paul Hogan, Crocodile Dundee himself, was apparently in genuine consideration for the role of a New York banker who gets shot and becomes a ghost. Paul Hogan. Every major male star in Hollywood looked at this script and saw the same thing Ford saw. Something they couldn't quite place. A romance where the lead is dead for 90% of the film. A thriller with no traditional villain until halfway through. A comedy that's also about grief. Nobody knew what to do with it.
You see, I figured this thing out. There's something we can do. All we gotta do is we can...
Oda Mae?
which, as we'll see, is exactly why the person who eventually played Sam Wheat had to fight so hard just to get in the room. Number 12. Zucker saw Roadhouse and said never. While Jerry Zucker was busy passing on every actor in Hollywood, screenwriter Bruce Joel Rubin had seen something on television that he couldn't let go. Patrick Swayze, on a Barbara Walters interview special, talking about his father's death, crying, openly, unselfconsciously, in a way that had nothing to do with performance or image management.
You made him proud.
Oh, Jesus. Well, that was his problem. He thought crying was weak. Texas mentality.
Just a man with real grief, visible on his face. Rubin was convinced. Zucker was not. So Rubin did what he had to do. He called Swayze's agent behind Zucker's back and quietly arranged for Swayze to come in, something Rubin has noted that Zucker didn't find out about until years later. Zucker, meanwhile, had decided to do his due diligence. He went to see Swayze's most recent film. That film was Roadhouse. He walked out of the cinema and reportedly told Rubin, "Over my dead body." Here's what happened next. Swayze, who had been wanting this role so badly that the script had left him in tears, walked into the audition room and told them he was going to read the entire final scene. They let him. He read Sam's last words to Molly, "The love inside, you take it with you." And when he finished, according to Zucker, every single person in the room was crying, including Zucker himself.
It's amazing, Molly. The love inside, you take it with you.
Who knew exactly how it ended? Who had read those words dozens of times across 19 drafts, still cried. "I saw a side of Patrick that I never knew existed," Zucker told People magazine in 1990. Swayze got the part. He later said he needed to do Ghost for his soul. Given what we know now, that he died in 2009, 19 years after this film came out, that line lands differently than it did at the time. Number 11. Willis turned down a role opposite his own wife. In 1990, Bruce Willis and Demi Moore were married. They had been since 1987. And at some point during the development of Ghost, someone handed Willis the script and said, "Your wife is playing Molly. You could play Sam." Willis read it, couldn't see it. His exact words, recalled years later. "I said, 'Hey, the guy's dead. How are you going to have a romance?'" He turned it down. The role went to Patrick Swayze. Willis's next project was Bonfire of the Vanities, a film so catastrophic that even his co-star Tom Hanks later admitted to despising it. Ghost opened July 13th, 1990. Die Hard 2, starring Bruce Willis, was already in cinemas. For a stretch that summer, the number one film in America was Ghost with Demi Moore. The number 2 film was Die Hard 2 with Bruce Willis, a married couple holding the top 2 spots at the American box office simultaneously. A feat that, according to film historians, wouldn't happen again with any couple until Deadpool and Wolverine in 2024. Willis eventually watched Ghost. He loved it. He called himself a knucklehead publicly and repeatedly. What he'd said about not seeing how a romance between a ghost and a living person could work, famous last words he noted, turns out the whole world could see it just fine. Number 10. Kidman's failed audition accidentally launched her career. Michelle Pfeiffer was considered for Molly, then Molly Ringwald, then Meg Ryan, then Julia Roberts, then Nicole Kidman, who at this point was not yet the Nicole Kidman we know. She was relatively unknown outside Australia in a handful of smaller films. Kidman auditioned. Zucker and Rubin loved her tape. They went with Demi Moore anyway. Moore was the more recognizable name, and she'd been their preference from early on. But Kidman's tape was good enough that it didn't just disappear into a casting file. It made its way up the chain at Paramount. Executives watched it, were impressed. And as a direct result, Nicole Kidman was offered a role in another Paramount film shooting that year, Days of Thunder, starring Tom Cruise. She took it. She and Cruise fell in love on set and were married by the end of 1990. A career-defining relationship, and eventually a marriage, that traces its origin, at least in part, to an audition tape for a role she didn't get in a film she was never in. Rubin later cast her in his own directorial debut, 1993's My Life. He clearly never forgot how good that tape was. Number 9. Everyone on the production agreed, anybody but Whoopi. Bruce Joel Rubin, the man who wrote Oda Mae Brown, who described her as the most fun character he'd ever created, told the casting agents flat out, anybody but Whoopi Goldberg. His concern was that Goldberg was primarily a comedian, and he was afraid of what a comedian would do to a role that required genuine heart underneath the laughs. So they went wide. Tina Turner was considered. Oprah Winfrey was considered. Patti LaBelle was considered. Rubin has said that practically every prominent black female entertainer in Hollywood was in the mix at one point or another, and none of them quite landed. The part started to feel uncastable. Patrick Swayze, who'd never met Whoopi Goldberg, but had seen her perform years earlier in a one-woman show in New York, kept pushing. He told producers he wasn't committing to the film until Goldberg had been given a shot. Eventually, Zucker and Swayze flew to Alabama, where Goldberg was shooting another film, and the three of them read together. Goldberg later said she and Swayze took to each other immediately. Zucker watched them read and said he could just see the whole film working at a level he hadn't imagined. Goldberg got the part over Rubin's objections. Rubin has since said he has never been so wrong about anyone in his professional life. In 1991, when Goldberg won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress, the first black woman to win that award in 50 years, she thanked Patrick Swayze from the stage and called him a stand-up guy. Swayze died in 2009. She has never stopped crediting him. Number 8. The pottery scene was conceived on a different film. In Bruce Joel Rubin's original script, Molly wasn't a potter. She was a sculptor, a wood sculptor, specifically. Rubin imagined her wielding big hammers and chisels, attacking enormous blocks of wood with physical force. He thought it made her powerful and interesting. Jerry Zucker thought it felt harsh, cold. He couldn't see how you made it sensual, so he sat on the problem. And then one day, while doing post-production work on The Naked Gun, a completely different film, a comedy, nothing to do with Ghost, he was sitting in the edit suite next to a sound engineer who was reading a pottery magazine. Zucker picked it up, flipped through it, looked at images of hands working wet clay on a spinning wheel, and something clicked. He called Rubin. Rubin liked the idea immediately. His wife was a potter, so the rewrite was easy. Rubin has since noted, with some amusement, that visitors to his house who spot the pottery studio in the corner now wink at him knowingly. He finds this tiresome. The pottery scene, the most parodied, referenced, and replicated love scene in the history of 1990s cinema, exists because of a magazine in an edit suite, on a different film, read by someone who wasn't even involved. Number 7. Originally, Oda Mae dies and kills the villain herself. The Ghost You Know ends with Oda Mae alive, Sam ascending to heaven, Molly saying ditto, warm, transcendent, earned. That is not how Bruce Joel Rubin originally ended his film. In earlier drafts, Carl, the villain, shoots Oda Mae dead near the climax. She dies. Her ghost immediately re-inhabits her own mangled body, and then, using whatever force of will dead women apparently possess in the Rubin cinematic universe, she uses that body to attack and kill Carl, saving Molly herself. Rubin has described this version as a hard R sex and violence draft that bears limited resemblance to what ended up on screen. Zucker eventually persuaded him that having Oda Mae possess her own corpse and commit murder was perhaps not the emotional landing the film needed. Rubin resisted for a while. The compromise was giving Sam the power to physically interact with the world, which is why the second half of Ghost works, so that he could defeat Carl himself, and Oda Mae could survive to comfort Molly at the end. It was the right call. But somewhere in a drawer, there is a version of Ghost that is significantly more disturbing than the one you grew up watching. Number 6. The pottery scene had a secret sex scene cut. Demi Moore took pottery lessons to prepare. She was anxious about it. Specifically, she was afraid her pot would wobble on camera, which she felt would expose her as a fraud. Patrick Swayze sat at the wheel beside her to rehearse the movements, just the two of them, fully clothed. Zucker watched the rehearsal and later recalled that even with all their clothes on, it was so charged that both actors turned noticeably red. Moore later said Swayze's face went bright red any time they even discussed the scene. Swayze, who described himself as deeply uncomfortable doing love scenes despite his public image, rehearsed it at home with his wife beforehand, just to get past the embarrassment. When they filmed it on a closed set, Swayze made a decision mid-scene. The pot they were building was progressing nicely, so he deliberately made it collapse. That wasn't in the script. He just decided to throw a curveball. Moore kept going, and the take they used is the one where the pot falls, which is the most famous version of the scene, an accident that was actually a choice. Here's the part most people don't know. The pottery scene was originally supposed to lead directly into an explicit love scene. Zucker filmed it, then watched the pottery footage back, and cut the sex scene entirely because the pottery had already done everything a love scene needed to do and more. The version of Ghost you've seen is the one where they stopped before the bedroom. Zucker later said the pottery scene proved so erotic that nothing else was necessary. Number 5, the plaster body nearly killed Swayze, then broke him. To create the dummy of Sam's body, the corpse that Molly cradles at the beginning of the film, the production team needed a life cast of Patrick Swayze. So they sat him down, shirtless, and began applying plaster to his torso, then his chin, then his face. Swayze, who had never experienced claustrophobia before in his life, suddenly found plaster creeping towards his mouth. With only 2 small straws inserted into his nostrils to allow him to breathe, he could feel liquid plaster seeping towards his throat. He later wrote that he was seriously freaking out, that he could barely breathe, that the sensation of foul-tasting liquid working its way into his esophagus was unlike anything he'd experienced. A crew member eventually shoved a tongue depressor through a hole to help him ventilate. He got through it, but the claustrophobia that experience created stayed with him for the rest of his life. That was just making the dummy. What happened when he saw it on set was worse. Swayze walked onto the scene where Molly cradles Sam's dead body. He looked at the plaster figure in Demi Moore's arms, and without warning, without any preparation, he was back at his father's funeral 8 years earlier. His father had died suddenly of a heart attack in 1982, an event Swayze had apparently processed so incompletely that it was, in his own words, completely blocked out. Standing on set, looking at a dummy of himself dead, he felt his whole body start shaking, heart pounding. He later described it as a panic attack. He was convinced he could feel his father's presence. Zucker kept filming. The footage was unusable. It was too intense, too raw, too much of the real thing rather than the acted version. They had to stop, wait for Swayze to recover, and shoot the scene again. The second time, he managed it. That's the take in the film. The first one, the one where Patrick Swayze genuinely broke, exists somewhere in an archive. Number 4. Cinema's most romantic song was written for prison. The song is called Unchained Melody. It was not written about love. It was written for a 1955 black and white film called Unchained, a low-budget prison drama about a convict deciding whether to escape or serve out his sentence and go home to his family. The lyrics, "Time goes by so slowly and time can do so much," are a prisoner's lament, a man locked in a cell, watching the clock. "Are you still mine?" is the question of someone who doesn't know if their partner has moved on. "God speed your love to me" is a man asking the universe to hold his relationship together across barbed wire and concrete walls. The song was originally performed by a prisoner in his cell, accompanied by another prisoner on guitar, while fellow inmates listened. It was nominated for an Oscar in 1956. It didn't win. The Righteous Brothers recorded their version in 1965, technically the B-side of a different single, and it went to number 4. Then it mostly disappeared for 25 years. Then producer Lisa Weinstein walked into a production meeting on Ghost carrying a cassette player and said, "I have our song." Everyone listened. There was instant agreement. By the end of 1990, a song written for a prisoner counting the days had become the UK's best-selling single of the year, outselling Madonna, Sinead O'Connor, and Elton John. It has sold over 1 million copies in the UK alone. The Righteous Brothers became the first act in chart history to have 2 versions of the same song in the top 20 simultaneously. A love song for the ages. Originally, a song about being locked up. Number 3. Sam and Molly's apartment doesn't actually exist. The Soho loft where Sam and Molly live, the one they're renovating at the start of the film, with the high ceilings and the open stairs and the house-shaped enclosure around the refrigerator, is not a real apartment. It is a reproduction of a real apartment. The distinction matters. The real loft belonged to Michelle Okadonor, a New York artist. The production team approached her and asked to film there. She said no, so they asked for something else. Could she provide the floor plans? She agreed to that. And the production team took those plans to an empty loft nearby, also in Soho, 102 Prince Street, and built an exact replica, down to the radiators around the columns, down to the house-shaped refrigerator enclosure, a perfect copy of a home whose owner had specifically declined to let them in. Every scene set in that apartment, the pottery, the renovation, Sam's death, all of it, takes place on a set built from the blueprints of a woman who said no. Whether she ever watched the film and recognized her own ceiling is not something anyone has gone on record about. Number 2. The villain is named after Rubin's childhood nemesis. Bruce Joel Rubin has confirmed that Carl Brunner, the man who has his best friend murdered, launders money for drug dealers, and gets dragged to hell by shadow demons, is named after his elementary school teacher. The real Carl Brunner apparently repeatedly denied young Rubin the chance to put on plays in the school auditorium. That's the full extent of the grievance. A teacher who said no to some school plays. For 35 years, audiences around the world have booed and hissed at a character named after a man who just didn't want children performing in his auditorium. Rubin has never apologized for this. And then the ending. That moment when Sam walks into the golden light, the image that closes the film, the one that made millions of people cry in cinemas and still does, was almost a technical disaster. The original plan was to have Swayze kiss Moore, then walk up a Mylar ramp toward a blue screen with crew members visible in the shot. Test audiences would have seen grips in the frame of what was supposed to be heaven. VFX supervisor Richard Edlund stepped in. He took a piece of raw workprint footage of Swayze, carried it into a digital compositing bay, and started building. He shot elements on an animation stand. He ran an endoscope, a long, thin medical camera, through a handful of Christmas tinsel, and filmed what the light did as it moved through the strands. He fed all of it into a compositing system called the Harry, and constructed the golden light effect frame by frame. Heaven, in Ghost, is Christmas tinsel filmed through a medical instrument. It is one of the most beautiful images in 1990s cinema. It cost almost nothing and was made in a weekend. Number 1. It started with Hamlet. It ended with $505 million. Bruce Joel Rubin didn't set out to write a romance. He was at a theater one night watching a production of Hamlet, and he got to the opening scene, where the ghost of Hamlet's murdered father appears and says, "Revenge my death." And something clicked. What if you told that story in the 20th century? What if the ghost wasn't a king, but just a man? What if the revenge wasn't a prince's duty, but a love story? He wrote the script. It took years. The studio, Paramount, were enthusiastic enough to develop it, but only after demanding a complete rewrite of the third act. Nobody could agree on a director. The man who made Airplane came on board. 19 drafts followed. Half of Hollywood turned down the lead role. The casting of every major character was contested, reversed, or settled by accident. Ghost opened July 13, 1990. Paramount had low expectations. The release strategy was modest. The reviews, when they came, were mixed to lukewarm. Nobody at the studio was celebrating. Then something happened that nobody in Hollywood has been able to fully explain. Word of mouth caught fire. Audiences packed cinemas not once, but multiple times. The film stayed in the top 2 at the American box office for 8 consecutive weeks. It was still showing at Christmas. It became the highest-grossing film of 1990, beating Home Alone, Pretty Woman, Dances with Wolves, and Total Recall. It broke the all-time box office record in the UK, surpassing E.T., the Extraterrestrial. It became the most rented video cassette in America in 1991. It was nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. It made $505 million on a $22 million budget. A film inspired by a ghost in a Shakespeare play, built on accidents and arguments and casting decisions made in the back of a taxi, starring a man the director had sworn would never get the role, became one of the most beloved films ever made. Rubin has said he was as surprised as anybody. He probably shouldn't have been. He'd written the ending. He knew the love inside, you take it with you, and there you have it. 15 weird facts about Ghost, the film nobody could categorize, that everybody went to see anyway. If this brought back something you'd half forgotten, hit like and share it with someone who still thinks pottery is a perfectly reasonable date night activity. Subscribe to Remember That Time for more deep dives into the films that raised us. We'll see you in the next one.